You're tuning into Creepy Time, where we bring you chillin' creepy stories and eerie urban legends every day at 6 p.m. To support Creepy Time, please don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comments so we can discuss the story together. Now let's dive into today's tale. Survival rules for night shift subway security guards. I hadn't slept well that night, those uneasy half-wakes, where the sofa feels like a battlefield and every creak in the house sounds like footsteps. Around 12:15 a.m., my phone buzzed with that low battery whir. On the screen was unknown, but Henderson, my shift manager, had that gravelly tone I recognized even without a name attached. "Get to Central," he said, clipped. "Marcus vanished. Triple tonight." 3 times pay doesn't usually pique my curiosity. I've done enough graveyard shifts to know when something's off. But this felt personal. Henderson sounded drained. And when your boss sounds like he's not just asking, he's begging, I learned long ago you don't refuse. So I grabbed my coat, left my cheap television silent in the background, and made my way through empty streets. Central Station at this hour looks like a mausoleum someone forgot to lock. The fluorescent lights overhead give off a jaundiced glow, casting everything in half-dead color. You half expect rats to chant your name, and with this story, it might have been the cleaner thing. I've worked subways in Chicago for 2 years, done the rounds, seen the usual vomit, fare evaders, the stray harmonica player at 3 a.m., People call that shift zombie hour, everyone sleepwalking or stepping off it, but I've never felt like I was on another planet until that moment. I passed the turnstiles and heard my own footfalls echo, as if someone else was pacing just behind me. Henderson hadn't given directions. I knew exactly where Marcus's post was, the little guard room tucked off platform 6. It's cramped bare bones radio, a couple of chairs, desk lamp that flicks like an old movie. Usually, someone's there, passing time. Not tonight. The stench hit me first, stale coffee, cigarettes, and something metallic lurking underneath. That's when I spotted the notebook, open, ink smeared like someone dropped it mid-sentence. My heart skipped. Marcus never wrote in front of anyone. The man was private, but there it was. 13 cars, counted them. 1 week into a new job, and you learn the superstition subway trains in our system are max 10 cars, 12 only for holiday rush, 13? That's folklore. Some people say ticket takers once skipped it like skipping number 13 in hotels. I call that ghost story fuel. But there, scribbled in Marcus's cramped handwriting, was the impossible. I've heard stories from old-timers like Ed who worked here before me. He once told me during a power outage, he saw the reflection of a passenger who didn't exist, a kid with a ghastly smile, but the car was empty. I blinked, he said, voice low. Blinked and he was gone. Either Ed was drunk or he believed something underground was trying us. When I leaned closer, I noticed something by the track's red-brown stain on the platform edge, and something dark beside it. Marcus's guard cap, brim-soaked. I picked it up, thumb brushing that stain. My stomach dropped. Something in that moment made me long for a puke break. And that's when I heard it, the rumble that didn't belong. Not the usual shudder of steel, it was deeper, like a growl. I stepped closer to the track, and in the distance, headlights appeared, red like warning lights. I counted as the train came through, 13 cars. I counted them, felt like jumping off a cliff. By the time I got the doors open, I wasn't thinking. The empty darkness inside felt alive, thick in the chest, like you're walking into someone else's breath. And then my name rolled out. Not from a speaker, not from a mouth beneath my ribs. And it wasn't Marcus who called. Real world tie-in. That's when I remembered the story of Karen Mooney Nye MTA employee back in '98. She walked through Times Square late, saw a train with no conductor, sliding to a full stop. Doors opened, She peered in, no one was there. She went inside, looked for anything, and the doors slammed on her, alone in an empty car for 30 seconds. Then it pulled away. When she exited at 14th, she couldn't explain the burn on her arm. She quit the next week. By the time I snapped out of it, my phone was dying. I radioed Henderson. It's bad. His silence said more than any warning. He told me to stay put. No one was to board that train. Which is when I realized I wasn't just working a shift. I was inside someone else's warning. Curiosity can lure you into danger, especially in familiar places at odd hours. And sometimes, the rules exist not for efficiency, but for survival. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the black steel of that impossible train reflect the weak overhead lights. 13 cars, no numbers, no logos. Just smooth, industrial skin like someone had erased its history. That's the worst thing about fear. It makes you curious. I should have turned around, called backup, run, but instead, I waited. My flashlight felt heavier than it should have, and my own breathing sounded like it belonged to someone else. The door slid open, not with the hiss of hydraulics, but with the sound of something sighing. Inside, there was no light. It wasn't darkness like night heat was absence. Looking inside felt like leaning over the edge of something infinite. I've seen blackouts on trains. I've done evacuations when lights fail, but this wasn't technical failure. It was deliberate. And then it spoke. Or at least something did. From inside that hollow space came a voice that didn't belong to anyone I knew, but it used my name. Ezra. It wasn't loud. It didn't echo. It just arrived, somewhere deep in the center of my ribs, like it had been hiding there all along. And for a split second, I stepped forward. I don't remember choosing to. My foot just moved. It's easy to judge that moment from safety. You might ask, why would someone step towards something like that? Let me tell you a real story. Something a retired Chicago Transit Authority guard told me once over coffee in a freezing employee break room. His name was Will. 40 years working night shifts, he told me about the tunnel's call. He didn't use spooky language, he wasn't selling a ghost story. He said every so often at the end of his shift, when the last train cleared out, he'd hear his daughter's voice. Just past the third rail, he said. Always just past it. Thing was, Will's daughter had been gone 3 years. He said the voice never begged, it just invited. That's what the voice from that train felt like. Not a command, not a threat, an invitation I couldn't explain. 2 more steps and I'd have been inside, but someone stopped me. A hand gripped my shoulder hard, pulling me backward. I spun around ready to punch, but what I saw froze me more than the train. It was an old man and an older guard, uniform patches faded, badge scratched down to bare metal. He looked like someone who'd seen too many years underground. His name tag worn down to a ghost. But his grip was strong, like concrete. "You're not getting on," he growled. His voice wasn't scared, it was certain. Before I could answer, the train doors slid shut behind me, silent, final. "Come with me," he said, already walking. And somehow, I followed. We made it back to the guard station without a word. When he finally spoke again, it was in the dark, sitting across from me as the overhead bulb flickered above. "You think Marcus was the first?" he said, voice hoarse. I shook my head, unsure what to believe. "7th, he said flatly. "7th one we lost this quarter." That number hit harder than the cold. Not because it was high, because it was casual. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick, battered leather notebook, the kind detectives used back in the 50s. He slid it toward me across the table. "This is why you're alive." I opened it carefully. The leather cracked. The pages inside smelled of mildew, copper, and something else I didn't want to name. Inside, handwritten, in cramped, angry script were the rules. Rules for surviving a station no one admits is haunted. Rules written in first names and body counts. And scrawled across the top of the first page, one sentence stood out. Do not board the 13-car train. At this point, the old guard's voice dropped low. They're not trains, he said. They just wear trains like a mask. I should have been scared, but all I felt was cold confusion. What are they? I whispered. He looked me dead in the eyes. Collectors. I remembered then something I'd read years ago when researching urban folklore for a college project, something about passenger trains to nowhere. In 1964, the NYC transit system officially documented a train that entered the Hoyt-Schermerhorn station during off hours but never logged departing. Employees reported lights seen moving in unused tunnels for weeks after. The official report called it system error. But error doesn't explain screaming doors. The old guard's explanation wasn't academic. They ride the rails after midnight, collect memories, people, anything that follows curiosity. I asked him, honestly, why the hell anyone let this keep happening? He smiled, bitter and sad. Because City Hall doesn't believe in ghosts, and dead men don't file reports. That was the point when I realized something deeper. This wasn't about saving Marcus. It was about saving myself. Because according to the old man, just seeing the 13-car train marked you, and I'd looked it in the face. It reminded me of a story I'd heard from an urban explorer named Mike who used to sneak into abandoned subway tunnels beneath Philadelphia. One night, deep underground, he stumbled across a maintenance car idling with no workers nearby. He described feeling like he was being watched from inside the train, even though he saw no one through the windows. He left without taking pictures of first for him. A month later, he stopped exploring entirely. He says some tunnels weren't forgotten. They were avoided. As the old guard outlined, the next rules: never ride between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Never trust anyone calling your name inside the tunnel. I kept thinking about Will's story, about the voice that calls you just beyond the third rail. Because now I understood. That voice wasn't there to warn you. It was there to pull you in. Fear isn't what kills people underground. It's familiarity. It's the little voice saying, just a quick look. And it's why old-timers write down rules instead of reasons. Because explanations make you curious, and curiosity gets you collected. The old man sat across from me in that grimy guard room, rolling a half-spent cigarette between his fingers without lighting it. Maybe he'd quit years ago, but his hands hadn't gotten the message. Outside, the hum of the impossible train felt like it was still echoing through the walls, though I knew it had long since moved on. Maybe it never left. You want to live? He said finally without looking up. You start listening. You stop asking. He slid the notebook back toward me, tapping the cover twice. This is your manual now. Inside, the rules weren't written like procedures. They were written like warnings from a man losing a conversation with time. Some pages were smudged, others had what I prayed were coffee stains. Never work a shift past 4 a.m. No exceptions. Don't speak to anyone after the last train leaves unless you're looking right at them. If you hear music from the tunnel, get topside. You won't hear it twice. But the most chilling rule, the one scrawled, not printed, sat alone near the back. If you see a 13-car train and it opens its doors, you've already been chosen. The old guard watched me read, then leaned forward like the weight of his years could finally crush him. I've seen good men vanish mid-shift, he whispered. Not dragged, not screaming, just gone, like they remembered someplace else they needed to be. I wanted to laugh it off. I wanted to tell him this was a coping mechanism, a folklore story built around trauma, but I couldn't because the notebook felt heavier than paper. I asked him about Marcus. He just shook his head. You can't help someone who's been claimed. And that word claimed hung in the air like cigarette smoke. It didn't leave. He told me stories, not in the way a grandfather tells bedtime tales, but like someone trying to get a curse off his chest. Once, 5 years ago, he began, a rookie like you saw the wrong thing. He ignored the rules, thought he was smarter than an old man. Second night after the sighting, he said he saw his brother down by the tracks, waving him over. His brother'd been dead 2 years. The old guard stared at nothing. Next morning, we found his flashlight, nothing else. I asked if he believed it was ghosts. Not ghosts, he said. What then? He smiled hollow, things that remembered being human. I didn't sleep the next day. Every sound in my apartment felt like a countdown. Every glance at the mirror made me double-check my eyes. I called Henderson. I asked him how many others had reported the train. He hung up. I didn't blame him. But the notebook, the rules, stayed with me. Not because I believed, but because I couldn't afford not to. I tried to get back to normal. Next night, I clocked in, grabbed coffee, like always. But standing alone on that platform under those broken lights, I understood what the old man meant when he said, "You get marked." I started hearing footsteps that weren't there. Voices in the gaps between radio static. And once, at 3:12 a.m., I swear I saw a door open down the tunnel. No train, just the door. I didn't move. I remembered Rule 5. If you hear an invitation, do not answer, not out loud, not in your head. Because if they think you're listening, they'll speak again. That night, I sat down with my old friend James, a former subway operator from Boston. He told me about shadow passengers, those moments in the mirror where someone's sitting behind you, but your rear view shows empty seats. He said the worst part wasn't seeing them. It was knowing they saw you. People call these stories urban legends, but every legend starts from somewhere. And the tunnels, they remember. So, when I stepped back onto the platform, days later, and saw the same black train waiting with doors wide open, I knew 2 things. First, I'd already been chosen. And second, the rules weren't written to save you. They were written to slow it down. Sometimes, survival isn't about winning. It's about knowing you're already losing and staying 2 steps ahead of whatever's chasing. Because in places like this, explanations kill, and questions get answered in ways you don't come back from. I'd love to tell you that I held the line, that when the train came back, I stuck to the rules like a good soldier. But rules mean nothing when it calls you by name. That third night, I didn't mean to walk toward it, it just happened. 1 minute I was standing by the monitors, coffee cooling between my fingers. The next minute, the quiet hum of the platform changed, the kind of shift you feel more than hear, like the air itself leaned forward. The train wasn't supposed to arrive, but it did. 13 cars, black steel, windows darker than the tunnels themselves. I heard it call again, my name, but this time it wasn't alone. It said someone else's name too. Anna. That name cracked me. Anna wasn't just anyone. Anna was my sister, gone since last July, hit and run upstate, never found who did it. I never got to say goodbye, never saw her face at the hospital. But the voice from the train, it said her name like she was right there, standing inside. I didn't even think. I stepped forward. By the time I realized where I was, I stood 2 steps from the door. I could see inside now, not empty like before, number. This time I saw shapes, sitting still, too still. Heads turned just slightly in my direction, like they'd been waiting. And then I saw her. Middle of the 3rd car. Anna. She didn't look scared or dead. She smiled at me the way she used to when she beat me at chess. That small, knowing smile. I was inside before I knew it. Everything changed once I crossed the threshold. The air, different, thicker, like breathing through syrup. And the darkness wasn't total. It shifted, like fog that forgot how to move. I heard 100 voices around me, layered, mismatched, like radio frequencies bleeding into each other. Some sounded like Anna, others sounded like me. But the worst voice? The one that sounded like silence. I turned to leave, but the door wasn't there. Or maybe it never was. That's when the passengers stood up. Not quickly, not suddenly. Just one by one. Moving in sync like they were part of a slow, careful performance. Their faces were wrong. Not monstrous, not bloody, just wrong. Too smooth. Eyes too wide. Mouths that stretched a second too long before opening. And then they spoke, but not words. They echoed laughter, mine, Anna's, my old friend James's. Memories. I was standing inside a train filled with my own memories, replayed wrong. And I understood what the old guard meant. They wear people like a mask. I ran. Problem was, there was nowhere to run. The car stretched longer now, endless. No doors, just rows of silent, shifting shapes. The train didn't move. I did. And every step forward felt like walking deeper into my own past. I thought about Will, the guy from Chicago, the one who heard his daughter's voice just past the tracks. I wondered if he'd boarded. If this was where he ended up. I wondered if I'd become another shape sitting silently, waiting for someone else to step on. But then I heard a different voice. Rough, angry. Get down, rookie. I dropped without thinking. A flare burst through the air. Real light, not memory. The old guard. I didn't see where he'd come from. Maybe he'd been following me since I crossed over. Maybe he never left the train. He fired a second flare, the light searing enough to peel back the shadows. The shapes shrieked not in pain, but in disappointment. He pulled me up. You fool, he growled, dragging me backward. As the flare burned out, he shoved me toward a door that shouldn't have existed. And then I was back, on the platform, the impossible train gone, the silence heavier. He leaned me against the wall, panting harder than me, and whispered like someone too tired to be angry. They showed you what you wanted, and you gave it to them. I didn't answer, because he was right. The real trick wasn't fear. It was hope. I sat there until the morning shift arrived, my hands shaking. The old man, he vanished after that night. No one could tell me where he transferred. Henderson wouldn't answer my calls. But I kept the notebook because I wasn't sure who I was anymore, or how much of me got left behind in that third car. What kills you isn't always fear. Sometimes it's love, because the past knows how to hunt, and it waits where you can't resist looking. I didn't quit. That's the worst part of this story. After everything that happened, after nearly stepping out of my own life and into whatever hell waits inside those 13 cars, I still clocked in the next night. Not because I was brave, because I was terrified. Terrified that if I didn't show up, if I didn't stand there under those broken lights and face whatever watched from the tunnels, it would come looking for me somewhere worse. Like my apartment, or my dreams. You learn something after enough nights underground. Fear isn't a monster, it's a companion. It stays beside you, keeps pace, whispers in your ear that it's safer to look back. Fear wants you to freeze. But in that station, freezing gets you killed. I started wearing headphones, not for music, just static. White noise to block out the whispers that came between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. because they always came. The first few times, it was Anna's voice. That small, perfect invitation, "It's okay, Ezra, just step over." When that stopped working, they got smarter. Friends, old coworkers, even my own voice, calling from the end of the tunnel like I was already lost down there, begging for help. But what scared me most was the silence, the moments when no voices came. Because by then, I knew they didn't need to speak. They'd already marked me. I tried to fight it logically. At first, I read everything I could on urban legends, subway hauntings, missing person reports near underground systems. I found the stories everyone ignores. Strange shadows and security footage, entire shifts vanishing without disciplinary records, forgotten maintenance lines officially sealed but still registering electrical loads. The deeper I looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't folklore, this was infrastructure. At one point, I tracked down a retired New York MTA worker through an old forum for transit veterans. His name was Charlie. He wouldn't meet in person, only talk by phone, and only late at night. He told me about the ghost stop stations that appear once between two real stations, then never again. He claimed he'd seen passengers board at one of them. They looked normal, he said, but they didn't blink. He told me something else. Once you board a ghost stop, there's no getting off. I thought about that for weeks. What if that's what happened to Marcus? What if he never left the train because he never boarded it in the first place, not the physical version, but the memory of it? Maybe the real station was still there. Maybe Marcus wasn't. At that point, I wasn't sleeping properly. Shadows lingered too long at the edge of my vision. Once, I caught myself standing by the platform edge at 3 a.m., not remembering how I got there. I started carrying salt. I don't know why. Maybe because the old guard said it helped. Maybe because fear makes you superstitious. And then came the moment that proved I was already too far gone. The station's cameras, those grimy, outdated monitors that barely worked, showed me something they shouldn't have. A man, standing on the platform across from me, staring, not moving, not breathing, wearing my face. I don't know how long I watched myself standing there before something broke. I ran, full speed, from the security office to the opposite platform. When I got there, no one waited, but my own footprints stood in the dust. I stopped trusting myself after that. So I called James, the old friend who worked in Boston's tunnels. I needed someone who knew me before this place started unmaking who I was. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. His answer was simple. Don't anchor yourself to facts, he said. Anchor to feelings. Facts change down there. Emotions don't. It sounded ridiculous. But in the middle of that nightmare, it was the only real advice anyone had given me. So I tried. Every time the whispers called, I reminded myself how Anna's real voice sounded, not the imitation. Every time shadows wore my face, I focused on how James's hand felt on my shoulder back when he congratulated me for getting this job. Small memories, honest ones, ones the darkness couldn't forge. And somehow it worked. For a while, until the train came back. Not once, not twice, but every single night. Now, the doors didn't open, the train didn't speak. It just waited. And I understood. The collectors don't need to drag you inside. If you've seen them once, you're already walking toward them. Slowly, patiently, on your own. Because curiosity becomes longing, and longing becomes surrender. That's how it ends. Not with screams, but with footsteps. In the fight against darkness, knowledge isn't your weapon, memory is. Not the kind written in reports or recorded on cameras, but the small, human moments you carry, the ones that remind you who you are before the shadows rewrite you. Because down in the tunnels, you don't lose your life, you lose yourself. I didn't realize the moment time stopped. Not at first. Everything looked the same that night, the flickering overheads, the low hum of the tracks, the stale chemical stink that never quite left the platform. I drank my coffee, I paced, I checked the monitors, but the clock in the corner of the security feed, it didn't change, 2:59 a.m., and it stayed there. I must have watched that minute freeze for what felt like hours before it hit me. The train wasn't late, it wasn't early, it wasn't coming, because it was already here, and I'd stopped waiting for it. I'd started waiting inside it. When you work underground long enough, you start trusting your ears more than your eyes. You learn to hear the difference between metal and stone, between the quiet of safety and the silence of something watching you. That night, the silence wasn't just heavy, it was hollow, like the world had gone to static. I tried the emergency phone, dead. Radio? Just hissing. I thought about walking out, heading up the stairs, back to street level, to oxygen that didn't feel borrowed, but something deeper inside me knew that leaving wasn't an option. If I went up those stairs now, I wouldn't step out onto the city I remembered. Whatever version of the world waited for me up there, it wouldn't be mine anymore. That's when the first shape stepped onto the platform. At first, I thought it was human. Man in a security jacket, looked like Marcus from behind. Then he turned, and it wasn't. No face, no features, just a surface stretched too tight, like plastic wrap over something raw. But it stood like Marcus, moved like Marcus, as if my memory of him had been fed through a broken machine and printed wrong. I backed into the wall. And then a second figure appeared. Then a third, one after another, all wearing pieces of people I used to know. None of them fully correct, like the darkness was running out of ways to fake humanity. They didn't move fast. They didn't need to. I understood now. I wasn't being hunted. I was being collected. I'm not proud of what happened next. I ran down the platform, past the yellow line, straight into the tunnel, flashlight flickering, boots sliding over damp concrete. I didn't care. The rule said never enter the tunnel after hearing the invitation. But what if the invitation wasn't a sound? What if it was silence itself? I kept running until the light behind me vanished, until all I could hear was my own breath and the distant, rhythmic sound of footsteps matching mine. That's when I saw the light. Red. Not ahead. Above. I looked up. Somewhere beyond the tunnel walls, something watched me through a window that wasn't there. The light pulsed like a heartbeat, like the station itself was alive. And suddenly, I wasn't in the tunnel anymore. I was inside something deeper. The station behind the station. The rails under the rails. The collectors didn't build this place. They remembered it. I dropped to my knees, too tired to move, too scared to think. And then I heard her, Anna's voice. Not from the shadows, not from the train, from right beside me. Ezra, she whispered, we're so close now. I turned, and there she was, or what was left of her. I won't describe what I saw. Some things shouldn't be put into words. But her voice was still perfect. Come with me, she said, and I believed her. For half a second, I reached out. But then I remembered James's advice. Anchor yourself to what's real, to what feels real. I thought about that last summer with Anna, the way her voice cracked when she laughed too hard, the way she'd throw popcorn at me during bad movies. Small memories, true ones. And that's when I saw the mistake. The thing wearing Anna didn't blink. She never blinked. Not once. That's how I broke free. I stood, turned away, and I walked. Not fast, not panicked, just steady. Because the real danger wasn't being chased. It was being watched. Every step forward felt like moving through wet concrete. But I kept walking. I don't remember how long. Hours, days. Maybe I'm still there in some way. Eventually, I found the door. Not a door out, a door back to the platform. I stepped through. And the moment I crossed the threshold, time started again. The overhead clock clicked to 3 a.m. The silence lifted. The platform was empty, and the train was gone. Sometimes, survival isn't about escaping the darkness. It's about recognizing the lies it tells, the ones dressed as memories, as comfort, as home. Because the dead don't come back, and the living don't wait forever. When you hear your past calling from the shadows, don't answer. Not even once. Because the moment you believe the voice, you're already walking toward the train. And the doors always open for those who ask. After that night, I stopped pretending I was in control. The notebook, the rules, the old warnings, they weren't written to save me. They were written to help me delay the inevitable. Every shift I worked, every breath I took underground felt like a countdown I couldn't see. And the strangest part, I stopped being afraid. Not because I was brave, because I'd finally understood. Fear was pointless now. I carried that notebook everywhere, flipping it open like a prayer, memorizing lines I already knew. But there was something I'd missed, a page near the end. The leather so stained and brittle that the pages clung together until one night, hours after the station had gone quiet, I found it. The final rule. Written not in the careful, shaky handwriting of the old guard, but in jagged, angry slashes across the paper like someone wrote it with the last of their strength. It said simply, "When you hear your own voice say your name, don't listen, don't turn, don't answer, and above all, don't follow." I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at that line. It made no sense. My own voice? But the more I thought about it, the more it made perfect sense. The collectors didn't need to hunt me anymore. I'd been doing the job for them. Every time I stepped toward that train, every time I listened for Anna, every time I doubted whether I was awake or dreaming, I was becoming my own invitation. And I remember what the old guard said. They don't drag you, they let you walk. That was the last shift I worked at Central Station. Not because I quit, because Henderson never called me back. And when I returned, keycard dead, shift reassigned, my locker cleared out, the guards who looked at me didn't see me anymore. It was like I'd never worked there, like I was already gone. I stood on the platform that night, alone, one last time. And I waited. The train didn't come. The doors didn't open. But in the reflection of the glass, I saw myself, standing where I shouldn't be, smiling when I wasn't, and I heard my voice. Right behind me, Ezra. I didn't turn, I didn't answer, and I didn't follow. That was the hardest part, walking away from my own voice because it sounded so real. But I kept walking, and I didn't stop until I saw sunlight. I left the city that week. I've never been back underground. No subways, no parking garages, not even basements. People call it paranoia. I call it survival. The notebook stays with me, not as a warning, as a reminder, because the final truth isn't that there are monsters in the dark. It's that once you meet them, they never really let you go. And the real horror, one day, when you're tired enough, lonely enough, you'll stop seeing them as monsters. You'll start seeing them as familiar, and you'll step aboard willingly. The scariest voices are the ones that sound like your own. When your past calls to you, when your memories feel safer than your future, remember, not every door that opens is meant to be walked through. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is keep walking, even when it means leaving yourself behind. You'd think leaving would have ended the story, that putting miles of highway between me and that station would have broken whatever thread tied me to those tunnels. But the station doesn't work like that. You don't leave it, not really. Because the real station isn't underground, it's in your head. Weeks after I left, the dream started. At first, they were harmless, standing on platforms that didn't exist, hearing announcements for trains that weren't scheduled. But then I noticed things missing from my apartment. Little things. My coffee mug, my keys, a photograph of Anna that I kept in a frame beside my bed. They weren't stolen. They were misplaced. And in the dreams, I saw them, lined up neatly on the platform edge, like offerings. Each night, I'd find more, objects I'd lost or forgotten years ago. My father's watch, a sweater I wore in college, a book I lent to a friend who never returned it, all waiting, as if the station wasn't just remembering me, it was collecting me, piece by piece. People around me started to notice, not the dreams, the changes. Friends said I looked thinner. Colleagues said my voice sounded wrong on the phone. My own reflection started to feel unfamiliar. I'd catch myself staring too long at mirrors, not recognizing the way my eyes watched me back. And then came the night I couldn't wake up. I stood on that familiar platform, 13 cars ahead of me, black steel, no windows. But this time, the doors didn't open. I did. I stepped forward, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt relief. Because after everything, after years of running, the idea of boarding felt easier than fighting. Then I remembered the old guard's words. They don't drag you, they wait. And I realized something. The collectors weren't the ones who trapped me. I was. All they did was offer the door. I kept standing in front of it. And that's when I understood the final rule wasn't about hearing my voice. It was about recognizing the moment I stopped resisting. Because the real danger wasn't the train. It was the desire to board. In the dream, I turned away. I forced myself to walk backward, step by step, 1 inch at a time. And as I did, I saw it. My face, watching me from the door, smiling. It didn't try to stop me. It didn't have to, because it knew the truth. I'd be back, eventually, and it would still be waiting. I woke up screaming that night. I left town the next morning, sold everything, changed my name, moved west, somewhere the tunnels don't run. But I know it's only a matter of time, because once you've heard the invitation, you carry it inside you, and eventually the collectors will stop waiting. They'll come looking, not for your body, for your memories, for the pieces of you that want to go back. And when that happens, all the rules, all the warnings won't matter, because no one resists forever. Sometimes the scariest trap isn't the one you can't escape, it's the one you stop trying to. When you find yourself standing at a door you know you shouldn't open, remember, not every exit leads you home, and some doors were never meant for you. The collectors don't steal you. They wait until you give yourself away. If you've listened this far, maybe you're wondering what any of this means. Maybe you're waiting for me to tell you it was all in my head, that the strange trains, the whispers, the shadowed figures were just symptoms of exhaustion or stress. And honestly, I used to hope that too, Because believing this was just a nightmare would have been easier than accepting the truth. But here's what I've learned after everything. There's a reason stories like this stick with us. Not because we believe in monsters, but because we understand them. We live with them every day. They just wear different faces. You don't have to work the midnight shift at a subway station to know what it feels like to be hunted by your own thoughts. To feel like time's frozen and your life's on repeat, and you're stuck watching yourself drift further from the person you used to be. You don't have to see shadow creatures to understand what it's like to lose yourself. And that's the real point. The train, the collectors, they're metaphors. The endless platform is the life we put ourselves on autopilot for. The train is the promise of escape that tempts us when we're too tired to fight. And the collectors, they're the voices in your head convincing you it's easier to give up. When I stood in front of that train night after night, it wasn't the monster waiting behind the doors that scared me. It was the part of me that wanted to step inside. Because surrender is always easier than survival. And that's the danger nobody warns you about. We think we're afraid of the darkness outside, but the real battle, it's against the darkness inside. So when your mind whispers it's okay to quit, when your memories offer you an exit that feels too easy, when your own voice tells you to follow, don't. Stand your ground. Even if your legs shake, even if you're exhausted, even if all you want is for it to stop, because the doors are always waiting, and the train only takes passengers who stop fighting. I know that now, and I hope you do too. Whatever your station looks like, whatever your 13-car train may be, don't board. Keep walking. Even when it hurts, especially when it hurts, because survival isn't about being brave. It's about refusing to surrender, even when you're terrified, especially then.